Welcome to the Introverted Doctor Podcast, the podcast that uncovers myths, mistakes, and misconceptions that holds healthcare professionals back from living their best life at work, home, and play. I'm Dr. Lalit Chavla, and with each episode, I'll be focusing on different aspects of a healthcare professional's life, such as communication techniques, mindset, routines, tools, and strategies, with the goal to show how to eliminate anxiety, trip-ups, and unwelcome results that come from ineffective communications. I want to thank the people who contacted me regarding the previous podcast and how they found it helpful. And the one consistent question that I had from several people who have asked me to really comment on is, how does our childhood affect our adult actions and form our self-identity? And I think that's a very thoughtful and important question. It's also useful not to only answer that question for one's own knowledge and well-being, but it's incredibly helpful for when you're talking with others and you're trying to help them, especially in the clinical setting. As always, I have two meaningful real stories that are quite compelling, and I'm confident that you'll find them helpful as well. As in the past episode, I shared with you the 4 influencing or conditioning factors that influences our self-identity. The first being the things we consistently see. The second influencing factor was the things we consistently listen to. And the third is the language we use on a consistent basis, as was discussed in the Disgusting Patient episode 31. And finally, the fourth influencing factor is the people we consistently associate with. The people we associate with, especially those whom we encounter in our childhood, such as parents and teachers, produce the biggest impact on our identity. How and what those interactions were and the meaning we gave to them greatly affects us in all that we do. Let me be a bit more specific. Children's self-identity, which affects our current identity as an adult, are impacted also by 4 factors. So the first being, when we look back on our childhood, we can see now that we are shaped by key role models such as our parents, peers, and educators. Nothing means more to children than what their caregivers said and how they behaved with them at that time. Mostly because children are so dependent on them for their physical survival and their emotional well-being. So the first influencer in a child's identity are the caregivers and the primary role models in their early life and throughout their life, actually. The second thing is the words and actions that the caregivers used, and also the intensity of the language they used. So, for example, did they say, go up to your room and clean it up, please? Versus, did they say it with an angry tone and a lot of volume? So that's referring really, to the intensity of the language they used. Did they use, did they use words that were affirmative, that built up a child's sense of self-worth, versus words that degraded the child? So the third thing is the frequency with which they used those elements. In other words, repetition. Was the child's praised consistently or reprimanded consistently? Being scolded once, such as, gosh, you're lazy because you don't clean up your room, versus having that phrase repeated again and again, day after day, can shape a different outcome, because the repetitive exposure of that phrase, intentionally or unintentionally, can implant a certain characteristic. So in that example, it would be like, gosh, I must be lazy because my parent keeps telling me I'm lazy. And so then the child adopts that as part of their identity. So the repetition is important because that is a real conditioning factor. Repetition of an emotional experience, whether it's positive or negative, creates a powerful and often lasting impact. And the fourth key factor is, what was the social context or the situation, in the words that the caregiver displayed or conveyed, the language or behavior? Was the exchange in a private setting or public with other people around, which could, bring about pride in the child or equally shame, depending on the language that was conveyed by the role model? The social setting has a tremendous influence on our development of our self-image. And as mentioned, if the emotional display of praising or shaming occurs frequently, it impacts the child's identity even more so. For children, the need for love and acceptance is a natural predisposition and part of their development. Manipulating this need, intentionally or unintentionally, can have a long-term effect on a child's life choices. For example, a friend of mine, Jamie, whose name I've changed, was told by his mother that he wasn't smart, which absolutely wasn't the case if you looked at his academic achievements. But one day, a couple of his friends and I were hanging out at his home during the 11th grade, and we were talking about what we wanted to do for our careers. Unbeknownst to Jamie, his mother was standing right behind him when he said he really wanted to become an engineer. Now, upon hearing this, his mother unleashed a violent rant on him in front of us. "Who do you think you are, young man, thinking you can be an engineer? Don't you remember you couldn't even fix the connection on the toaster? You've really never succeeded in anything, so, why are you setting yourself up for failure? You're just not super smart. Don't set unrealistic goals." Needless to say, we were shocked and he was embarrassed. My friend's eyes welled up with tears. His mother had expressed her opinion in a social context, amplifying the intensity of the negative self-image that she projected onto him. Now, this is an example of an important role model expressing an important belief in a public way with the potential of leaving a lasting impression on him. Unfortunately, the outcome was that Jamie didn't pursue a university education, even though he'd been a high school honor student. Now, whether his mother had actively stopped him from pursuing his aspirations, or he'd simply been discouraged by her opinion of him, I cannot say. However, the primary parental figures are a child's main source of self-perception and self-worth. Children look to them for guidance, approval, and protection, especially in those early years. As children, we have a limited cognitive understanding of why our parents behave or think in a certain way. We don't comprehend their motivations and really can't appreciate their behaviors. I don't know if Jamie's mother spoke to him this way because of her own fears of failure, wanting to protect him from disappointment, or for a different reason altogether. I don't know if Jamie knew either. From what I could see, though, she did care for him because he wasn't, overtly abused or neglected, and she wasn't a mean person because she was very kind to me and his friends, and I saw, many displays of affection towards him. But what I do know is that Jamie's life changed because he believed what his mother believed. He adopted the self-identity that his mother had given him. Unfortunately, none of his other role models, such as his father or teacher, challenged the limiting belief that his mother held. And if they did, it wasn't in a consistent or impactful way. So that's important too. So I'll ask a question to you, the listener. Is there a significant role model who shaped your beliefs about yourself? Was the shaping done in a positive, negative, or neutral way? How did you interpret those interactions? Is there a particular event you still think about? These are some tough questions, and you might want to pause to reflect on them. For adults who have experienced difficult times in their childhood, it's not always easy to understand why their role models behaved the way they did. Some of their caregivers' behaviors may have resulted from personal fears, incompatible values, lack of awareness of what they were doing, and a lack of empathy. What's more, they may not have been ready or able to respond more eloquently because of their lack of awareness, knowledge, or level of consciousness because of their own childhood experiences. They more than likely had their own gaps and struggles. Whatever the reason, their actions served as a poor vehicle for meeting the child's need for self-worth. Depending on the meaning the child gives to the actions and words directed at them, that greatly can impact that whole interaction. Some children have moved forward in a positive way, some may not have. And why their role models behave the way they did may not be right or justified, but trying to understand things can help open the door to forgiveness towards recovery in the current state that the person is in. Giving too much power and significance to the past can hold us back from generating harmony and peace in the present. It's never too late to change the way you view your childhood and the way you view yourself currently. The past doesn't have to equal the present and the future, and that choice or reformulation is in our hands. For those of us whose parents were kind and inspiring, we don't always appreciate their impacts until much later in life, when we've had a more comprehensive understanding of the world. We appreciate our parents' capabilities and effects they had on us once we're able to compare them to our own abilities to overcome challenges, or simply when we observe how difficult it is to overcome, the similar situations they may have experienced. And especially if you have children of your own, and then you realize the challenges it is to raise children. Role models have a huge effect on a child's development of self-identity. Many of our emotional ties, even our relationships with money, people, God, are all influenced by our childhood experiences. But there's one bigger factor I want to re-emphasize again, which is how a child interprets the observations and interactions experienced during childhood. For example, one child may be motivated to avoid becoming like her inattentive caregiver, while another may feel he is doomed and destined to be just like his unsympathetic caregiver, and then models the same behavior. Both of these responses echo the sentiment of, I am where I am because my parent or parents behaved that way. How long an individual carries their emotional baggage depends on two elements. One is the tools available to help reach a healthier, broader perspective. In other words, tools to reshape our self-identity. And the second is the level of awareness that allows the individual to redefine his past or her past memories and experiences. As a doctor, I've seen the emotional baggage people carry with them and how they can be totally unaware of what's in that bag. I've seen well-established, outwardly confident people who appear to have everything: loving family, friends, great careers, joyful health, yet they still cling to past identities that prevent them from feeling joy and serenity in their present life. Particularly, I'm thinking of Jessica, a kind elderly lady who still feels a sense of melancholy towards her parents who have passed away, and also towards her sisters because they didn't display a more meaningful level of affection when she was a little girl. Jessica had struggled with feelings of neglect and inadequacies when comparing herself to her sisters, whom she absolutely adored. These feelings kept Jessica from experiencing complete joy and freedom in her adult life, even though she was the only one of the siblings to enjoy a nurturing, holistic work and home life. By all measures, she was successful with happy children and grandchildren in her adult life. But she didn't feel that way. She felt something was missing. Her sisters, rather admired Jessica for the treasured life that she had created and wished that they had even half the success that Jessica had. Jessica had, however, had been blinded to her gift, or the gifted world that she had, because she continued to wear the foggy glasses of the 11-year-old girl who seemed to be the forgotten middle child. Now, after some self-reflection and reframing, she forgave and let go of the forgotten little girl identity, realizing she was not the child of yesterday anymore. Once she did so, the fog lifted, metaphorically speaking, from her glasses, and she was able to engage with the present with a full-spirited and joyful self. She felt greater joy at the 78 and continued to do so from that moment on. And it was really admirable that she had the courage to work on that and reframing her self-identity. So in summary, childhood experience and authority figures are important influencers in our life, but they don't need to be consistent identity shapers forever. After all, we're all evolving and hopefully shaping a greater sense of self with new goals and aspirations. Getting stuck in the past truths and experiences doesn't have to be part of the present and shouldn't define us. Now, this approach applies not only to negative or hurtful things, but that may have happened, but it also applies to the most triumphant moments. Think about the high school athlete who persists in reliving the memory in which he scored the winning touchdown, never really moving forward to score new goals or create new challenges in his current life. Letting go of the past and generating new empowering memories is one of the best gifts we can give ourselves. It's a great way to expand a more meaningful and contributory self-identity. Ultimately, we are the creators of our self-identity. The power's in our hand to choose accordingly. Sometimes we need help in dissolving our past identities and creating new ones. To help open dialogue, especially in the clinical setting, there are a few meaningful questions that can be asked, such as, what was your childhood like with your parents? How was your interaction? Was there anything in your childhood that you think influences you today? You can create similar open-ended questions that help open up the conversation. Now, these issues can be deep and personal, and they definitely require a trusting atmosphere and courage and expertise in being an effective counselor. It's not for everyone to engage in this, so if you don't have any experience or support in dealing with that or as a counselor, you should really refrain from that, especially if there's been significant past traumas. So that's really the answer that I have for you today about how our childhood shapes our self-identity, and I hope that served you, and thank you so much for listening. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please share this podcast with your friends or colleagues, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. And if you go to the website, theintroverteddoctor.com, and sign up there, you'll get my weekly emails about each episode that's coming out. And they come out every Friday. I'm Dr. Lalit Chawla. Thank you so much for listening. Let's together make a greater, more effective community so that you live with greater passion and harmony and magic in your life and help others do the same. Have a super weekend, and I'll see you next week.